Scott Cooper is the director and screenwriter of The Pale Blue Eye. I'm David Buchanan with Gold Derby. Scott, I want to start by asking you about the source material for the film, the novel of the same name. What was your first kind of exposure to the novel, and what about it when you were reading it made you think this is really ripe for film adaptation?
Well, let me start by saying that much like Poe, I spent my formative years in the state of Virginia, where I was born, where Poe lived after he was brought by his benefactor John Allan to Richmond. And my father, who taught English and literature at one point in his life, we had lots of books around my house and lots of Poe. So after Crazy Heart, my father said to me, Scott, I've read the most ingenious novel where an author, Louis Bayard, has placed young Poe at the center of detective fiction, something that Poe bequeathed to us. So I read it just for pleasure. And then when I got to the end of it, I thought, wow, this could make for an interesting film, a fun film, given that the Poe that I would then go on to write and help create with Harry Melling ultimately was not the Poe that we would expect. We expect Poe to be dark and brooding and melancholy, which of course we see some of that in Harry's portrayal. But we, as an audience, as readers of Poe, tend to think of him only in those terms, of someone who created the macabre and horror fiction and detective fiction. So it seemed to me to be kind of interesting to show a Poe who was warm and witty and a great companion and someone who was unformed at this point in his life. And essentially what I'm saying is that this film is an Edgar Allan Poe origin story, that the events that take place in this narrative forced him to become the writer that we love.
You've teed up my next question beautifully, because I wanted to ask you about your experience as a reader of Poe. So you've answered that in part. So what I want to ask you also is, what kind of responsibility did you feel on bringing a Poe to the screen, as you're saying, who maybe has shades of Poe that an audience might not expect, but is just so beautifully rendered on the page and by Harry Melling?
Oh, well, thank you for saying that. What I will say is that, generally speaking, I'm more interested in films that push me into an uncomfortable space, because I think the great danger is doing safe work. And that is certainly true with this, because anytime that you place someone as popular as Edgar Allan Poe, again, the man who bequeathed to us detective and horror fiction, it can come across as, well, at least just dangerous, only because we have such preconceived notions about who Poe was, when in fact the portrayal that you see from Harry Melling is precisely, through all of my research, who Poe was. Again, warm, witty, humorous. But what I was interested in exploring is, what drives someone to madness? How much pressure has to build before they explode in violence? What causes morality and decency to erode in otherwise decent people? Poe, of course, probed these in his writings. Um, and it seemed to me that this film could use fiction to explore a truth that's familiar to anyone who has read or turned Edgar Allan Poe's pages. And that is that real horrors seldom have easy explanations. So for me, that was the challenge.
That's beautifully said. I want to ask you about the relationship at the heart of the film between Landor, played by Christian Bale, and Melling's Poe. I know you wrote the role of the detective with Christian in mind, but talk
Yes.
about pairing these two actors together, because their chemistry is, central to the success of the film, and they just work so well together on screen.
Thank you, and that's right. Their relationship, Landor and Poe, is the central relationship of the story of the film. And if that doesn't work convincingly, movingly, emotionally, then the film won't work. And here you have two performers who are bringing two very different styles to the film. You have, in Christian's portrayal of Augustus Landor, a very restrained but a very controlled intensity to this world-weary constable. And then you have Poe, who is prone to poetic and romantic notions, and someone who is unbound and who's just bursting forth with life. So you have one who's in the frame who's very grounded in Christian's performance, and one in Harry's performance that is of a poet who really can't contain his almost morbid curiosity of the world. So calibrating those two performances was a lot of fun, and I felt like that was the only way to really distinguish these two performers and these two characters that ultimately developed a father and son relationship. The film is a whodunit, of course, that's kind of the surface level, but it's really a father-son relationship that becomes quite tested at the very end of the film, to say the least. And then, of course, as I mentioned, it's a Poe origin story. So I can really only imagine Harry Melling playing this version of Poe, and I'm just thankful that he did.
Absolutely. I'm sure the viewers will feel that way as well. Let's pick up on the kind of whodunit aspect that you just mentioned, because obviously, as a reader of Poe and a reader of mystery and fiction, it's so tightly plotted. I'm sure in the novel, I haven't read the novel, but I'm sure it's the same way in the novel. But what is it like for you to translate that to screen and trying to think when you're writing the script about the pacing of the mystery, how you want it to unfold? Because obviously when you're reading, quite a different experience from seeing it unfold on screen. So just talk through that kind of process as a writer.
Yeah, it was a difficult adaptation. It was a much more sprawling novel, and I think one that would probably suit what's now popular as a limited series. But I felt like I could make a taut 2-hour film that allowed me to explore the things that I talked about in understanding who Poe is. But what I would say is that it was really difficult to, in terms of, and I'll try to keep this so there are no spoilers, in trying to keep the mystery alive, but also giving people who are playing very careful attention to characterization and plot an opportunity to perhaps spot the the person who committed these crimes throughout the film. I always believe that my films, all of them, in fact, get better upon repeated viewings because I hope that they offer a very rich palette for audiences on repeated viewings to see things that they might have missed the first time, or for things to take on greater resonance upon a second viewing. And never more so in this film, because when you see this film, should you deign to a second time, you'll see that all the breadcrumbs have been laid in terms of performance, in terms of calibration of performance, to take it just up to the line to give an audience an opportunity to understand who might have committed these crimes. And again, giving those who pay very, very close attention an opportunity to really spot that early on. So that was a real challenge, both in writing and certainly in directing it, and also in editing, how to give the audience just enough information. I also realize that we are making films in the most impatient of ages. I like to stand against it, but it's terribly difficult because whether it's studio heads or executives, producers, audiences, it's faster, faster, faster. Really giving the audience no time to kind of languish in these silent moments, which I find are just as important as those that are divulging plot, certainly for me. So in terms of, to answer your question about pacing, I thought it was important to revel in some of these moments so that we become more invested in the characters, and it isn't all about plot and, well, who done it.
Yeah, let's dive into that, because I absolutely agree. And I think the film really invites the viewer to go along with you on that journey, in part because of just the absolutely beautiful and kind of breathtaking exterior shots and the setting. I mean, it's such a spectacular film to watch, visually, so striking. Talk about first, I have a few questions on that, but talk about scouting your locations for this, because, not just the exteriors, which are appropriately icy and chilly and dark, but, the kind of the period architecture and the kind of Gothic look and feel is just so appropriate. So talk about finding, those locations.
Well, it was an incredibly brutal shoot. which is very fitting for Poe. At times, -4, -8 below zero. I said to my longtime cinematographer, Masanobu Takanagi, I said, I would like this, of course, to be shot in color, but to almost feel like black and white. Very controlled palette. And then my longtime production designer, Stefania Cella, and Kasia Wilicki Malone, my costume designer, the four of us together really tried to keep our colors within a very narrow frame, so that the audience felt like they were really transported to 1830 and weren't overtaken by the garishness of production design, camera moves, certain costuming. Because so often I watch a period film, I feel like I'm just watching actors in dress up. I know that it's a period movie, and it completely takes me out of it, or it presents a layer between myself and emotional layer, um, in engaging in the film. So I hope that, and all of my collaborators really believe in this, that we can pull back all of these period detailings to allow character and narrative story to take place. And Masa and I and Stefania really looked at the work of the German expressionist Caspar David Friedrich. Some of his work really influenced the exterior look of this. We looked to the Dutch masters for the interiors, Rembrandt. And then, of course, we looked to Kubrick's Barry Lyndon for candlelit interiors. So it was a real opportunity for me to explore 1830 and to present a palette that I had yet to in my filmmaking career.
Yeah, absolutely. It comes across so, as I said, so striking on screen.
Thanks.
I wanted to just ask you about some of your favorite shots that you've included. I mean, there's one sequence I can talk about because there's no spoilers in it, but
Yes.
It's Poe walking with a lantern down through the forest.
I was going to mention that. Yeah.
So striking. I mean, I just love, and as you said, it kind of invites a kind of slowing down and indulging in just kind of the visual and the kind of
Yeah, what's
atmosphere.
wrong with that, David? Because so often people want, it's like people are going to the movies like getting an enema. They want it over as quickly as possible. Yet they'll binge watch shows for 4 or 5 hours at a time. So why not be patient in moments like that? Which we went to painstaking work to get those details. It was, I think, 4 below zero. One of the actors got frostbite that night, but it felt like it really lended itself to Poe's macabre, to a world of darkness and shadows and fog that hopefully expressed visually what it might be like when you're reading Poe's work. Because this work is all about dovetailing into the worlds that Poe would create after the movie ends. So that sequence in particular, I also love the sequences in the cemetery between Poe and Lucy Boynton's Leah Marquis, that family, which I thought is really exquisite. I like the opening scene with Landor by the river as well, and the very opening shot of a young cadet hanging from a tree at 2, 3 o'clock in the morning along the Hudson River is something that sets the tone for the rest of the film, which we will then come back to.
Yeah, I was going to mention the opening as well. Just a great visual to begin the film.
Yeah, I thought so. The moose bouche, yes.
Absolutely. You mentioned a few of the actors. I just wanted to ask you about this incredible ensemble that you've assembled. I mean, I could rattle off so many names. Toby Jones, Simon McBurney, Gillian Anderson, Robert Duvall, on and on, Harry Lawty, just an incredible ensemble.
Thank you. Well, yeah, it's largely an English cast. I love to cast faces. All of the actors that you mentioned have really remarkable faces that certainly can play in contemporary films, but I feel like really express what I'm looking for in period films, and certainly 1830. And this dialogue, which is more florid than I usually write, seemingly, my opinion, is handled really well by these British actors. It's almost second nature to them, and they're really great with accents, a certain accent that wasn't quite English, but wasn't quite American English at the time, that they worked very, very hard with Jessica Drake, our dialect coach, So all of that together, I hope, comes really coalesces for the viewer in an era that you don't often see. We see the Revolutionary War, we see the Civil War, but 1830 is something that, at least that I can't think of, that isn't quite realized on film, and it really gave me an opportunity to do that. And on top of that, because I make very American films, and I love international cinema, in particular, but Mike Leigh, for instance, Tim Spall has been in 6 of his films. And I would say to myself, my God, I would love to work with Timothy Spall. Toby Jones, reunite with Gillian, whom I acted with on The X-Files. Robert Duvall, who's a mentor of mine. So you just take note of all of these, and then you start to tailor the screenplay for them and hope that they say yes, because the actors that are in my film, I can assure you, are offered the best scripts year in and year out, and they don't often have the time. So a lot of it was just luck, fortuitously.
Of course, when you mention casting faces, of course, Timothy Spall comes to mind. Just a great character and a great performance.
Yeah, and when I saw Harry Melling, the only time I'd ever seen him on screen was in The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, the Coen brothers film. And I said to Christian, we have found our Poe. His performance blew me away. And I thought, this kid can understand who Poe is and can really handle this dialogue. And I sent him the screenplay. He so graciously auditioned for us. I sent the audition to Christian, and Christian said, why look elsewhere?
Agreed. It worked out so well. Before I let you go, I do want to ask you, as without as many spoilers as we can, just about the climax of the film. Just from the perspective, not a plot, but I have to imagine when you're shooting a scene like that, the kind of reveal of who's behind the crime and whatnot, especially the way you've constructed this one, that is every department behind the scenes coming together in such an extraordinary way. So just talk about, the scenic design, the editing, as you were saying earlier about other scenes, but I feel like the climax of the film in particular, before the kind of lovely, other, concluding moments.
Final moments. Yeah.
Yeah. Just, talk about that.
Well, I will say that that's the scene that if that doesn't work, the film doesn't work. The endings are always the most important thing in a film. It's what you leave the audience with. It's what everything you've been working towards hopefully culminates in something that's satisfying, surprising, emotional, perhaps upsetting for some. And I took an entire day to shoot that particular scene because it was so important in terms of staging it, in terms of designing it, in terms of calibrating performance, and then working with Howard Shore, our great composer, to score it. That took 6 films of experience to direct that final scene in a way that felt satisfying, emotional, and honest. And I hope that audiences like that particular scene.
I think they will. Scott Cooper, congratulations on The Pale Blue Eye. Thank you so much for talking to Gold Derby today.
Oh, David, thank you so much, man. Really great questions, great interview.